The depths of Celestia Station belong to the forgotten. Below the polished commerce hubs and prestigious research facilities lay the undertow, where steam rose from fractured pipes and the station's heartbeat pumped loudest through corroded walls. Here, under flickering amber lights, desperation had currency, and survival had its price. Commander Thorn Raymond moved through this labyrinth with practiced stealth, his weathered gray coat pulled close despite the heat. The air clung to his lungs, thick with recycled moisture and chemical particulates, but it offered something the upper rings couldn't: anonymity. His gait was measured, unhurried yet alert, the walk of someone who understood danger intimately enough to avoid drawing its attention. For 3 years, he lived as a ghost within the station's vast ecosystem. Once a celebrated xenolinguist with the Interstellar Diplomatic Corps, now a nameless trader in forgotten dialects and prohibited data. The irony didn't escape him, that he'd found freedom in this suffocating underworld after fleeing the glittering chambers, where policy was made and wars were quietly sanctioned through carefully chosen words. Thorn's target today was an information broker who trafficked in rare language artifacts, specifically memory crystals containing the supposedly extinct Xanthian breath patterns. It had been over a decade since he'd encountered anyone who recognized the name, let alone possessed fragments of their cultural inheritance. He didn't expect that to change, until voices cut through the market's background noise. "Third auction cycle with no buyers," someone grumbled. "Processing gets her tomorrow. Waste of holding fees." "Defective merchandise," another voice agreed. "Neurologically damaged. Won't make a sound." Thorn shouldn't have looked. He'd trained himself not to look, to ignore the misery commerce that flourished in these sectors. Yet something in the tone pulled his attention sideways. Against a waste reclamation unit sat a figure so still she might have been mistaken for abandoned cargo. Naked, azure-skinned, and streaked with grime. Her hair, matted against her skull, appeared black in the shadows, but as Thorn's gaze lingered, he realized it was the deepest violet, like the nebula beyond the station's western viewport. She wasn't restrained, but processing markers on her ankle made restraints unnecessary. One slender arm crossed her chest in meager protection, the other wrapped around knees drawn tightly against her body. She didn't react when a half-eaten nutrition pack skidded across the floor toward her. Didn't acknowledge the vendors discussing her fate, but Thorn noticed her lips moving in precise, measured rhythms. Not random patterns, not madness or prayer. These were breath forms, complex linguistic structures preserved entirely through respiration patterns. Recognition jolted through him. On the frontier moon, Tarsa, before the Sovereign Alignment's purification campaigns, he documented these same patterns from elders who carried their entire civilization's knowledge in their breath. The Xanthians, believed completely eradicated during the Harmony Protocols 50 years earlier. Their language existed solely through oral transmission, never written or recorded, a deliberate adaptation against technological exploitation. Xanthians believed their ancestral spirits recognized only patterns carried on living breath, making their cultural inheritance impossible to steal or replicate through artificial means. Yet here was one, silently exhaling sacred codes in the filthiest corner of Celestia's underbelly. Thorn approached with deliberate casualness. The vendor nearest to him observed with disinterest. "Interested?" he asked flatly. "Take her. Nobody's paying disposal fees at this point. Joint decay's probably started. Mute and unmarketable. Worth less than your cloak." Thorn didn't engage directly. Instead, he removed his thermal coat and extended it carefully, placing it within her reach without invading her space. Her eyes finally moved. Irises of midnight blue ringed with silver met his. No gratitude, no recognition, just a still watchfulness that assessed everything. He lowered himself to her level and spoke in a language supposedly erased from the universe over half a century ago. "Navaris," he said softly, the Xanthian word for sanctuary. Her breathing pattern changed subtly, deliberate, calculated. She'd understood. A harsh announcement echoed through the market. "Sector Purge initiates at final bell. All unclaimed organic material will be processed. Compliance is non-negotiable." Thorn stood and activated his datalet, accessing a cultural preservation interface that the authorities had attempted to scrub from all systems. The Heritage Protection Protocol 37A remained embedded in the Interstellar Governance Charter, the ancestral knowledge preservation mandate that had once been his specialization. "She's not disposal material," he informed the vendor. "I'm claiming her under ancestral heritage protection. She's a living linguistic repository." "Don't quote dead regulations at me, Exile." "Not dead until I am," Thorne replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "I'm registering her as protected cultural heritage. She's a Xanthian breath carrier. She's worthless salvage with no identification markers." Thorne projected the charter section into the air between them. The hologram wavered but remained steady. "This mandate supersedes local authority. Interference constitutes a violation of protected heritage statutes." The vendor glowered at the projection, cursing under his breath. Across the corridor, a security officer noticed the exchange but remained distant. Some protocols endured in the station's operational memory, rarely invoked but never fully erased. "Take your salvage, preservationist," the vendor eventually spat. "She'll deteriorate in your quarters instead of processing." Thorne turned back to her. "My name is Thorne. I won't harm you. We need to leave before the purge cycle begins." She blinked twice, in acknowledgement. He gestured toward the coat rather than attempting physical contact. After a moment's consideration, she slowly reached for the garment, wrapping it around her shoulders. When she stood, her movements were unsteady but determined. Barefoot, trembling, her blue skin luminescent even under the market's sickly lighting. The vendor turned away as the security officer watched without intervention. Together they navigated the vapor-filled corridors, past flickering displays and broken junctions. Her silent presence behind him felt like carrying something infinitely precious and perilously fragile, something that might vanish if he moved too suddenly or breathed too loudly. They ascended a maintenance ladder toward the intermediate levels as Celestia rumbled around them, the constant mechanical respiration of ancient life support systems straining under the burden of too many lives in too little space. He didn't speak, and she didn't question their destination. In the silence, he glanced back. Her violet hair, heavy with grime, caught a shard of light from a damaged ceiling panel. Despite everything, it held an iridescent quality, like the wings of the extinct Proxima moths that once filled the gardens of his homeworld. He unlocked the door to his temporary quarters, a repurposed monitoring station above an abandoned data repository. The walls hummed with recycled thermal energy. A basin of filtered water stood near a fractured mirror, with sanitation cloths and simple clothing, a long tunic and practical leggings, folded beside it. She hesitated at the threshold. "This space is secure," he said. "No surveillance, no tracking." No verbal response, but she entered. Thorne turned away, respecting her privacy, and activated a nutrition packet before disabling the room's communication array. Behind him came the gentle splash of water against skin and the whisper of fabric being shifted. When he finally turned back, she had positioned herself near the wall, wrapped in the clean tunic, observing his every movement with intelligent wariness. He placed a thermal element near her without comment, then deliberately sat at the opposite end of the room and activated his datalet. He typed a single phrase in Xanthian script. "Nemara vos eltem, you remain remembered." She read it without visible reaction, but her breathing shifted, shallow, measured, controlled, the beginning of a ceremonial verse. Though her voice remained silent, he would later learn her name, Nyara. The silence between them transformed. It no longer pressed against the walls like something toxic, but settled like dust over an artifact finally retrieved from darkness, not comfortable, but no longer suffocating. Thorne woke to the soft sound of breathing, not his own. For a moment, disorientation gripped him. He'd grown accustomed to waking alone. Then memory crystallized, and he turned his head carefully toward the far wall. Nyara sat cross-legged on the floor, the clean tunic wrapped around her, eyes closed, not in sleep, but in what appeared to be meditation. Her breathing followed precise patterns, steady, measured, intricate. Each exhale seemed to contain information, coded in duration and intensity. Her violet hair, now clean and beginning to dry in soft waves, framed a face whose features spoke of another evolutionary path. Slightly elongated eyes, high cheekbones, a delicacy to her azure skin that seemed almost translucent in the room's muted light. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species, not despite her alienness, but because of it. The thought caught Thorne by surprise. He hadn't acknowledged beauty in anything for a very long time. As if sensing his attention, her eyes opened, midnight blue with silver rings that seemed to capture light like miniature eclipses. She didn't startle or speak, simply regarded him with that same still watchfulness she'd shown in the market. "Did you rest?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. "Some," she answered, the word barely audible but unmistakable. Her voice had a quality he couldn't quite define, like distant chimes carried on wind. Thorne moved to the small preparation area and activated 2 nutrition packets. As the heating elements warmed their contents, he felt her eyes tracking his movements. Not with fear, he realized, but with analytical precision. She was mapping his habits, his patterns, learning him just as thoroughly as he wanted to learn her language. "You knew what I was saying," she said suddenly, her voice stronger than before. "In the market. You spoke Xanthian." He turned, surprised by her directness. "I studied your people before the Harmony protocols." Something flickered across her face. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "We have different terms for that time." "I imagine you do." He brought the food to the center of the room and set it down, then backed away to give her space. "I was part of the Cultural Preservation Initiative. We tried to document as many languages as possible before they were erased," she finished for him. "Yes." She approached the food cautiously, kneeling across from it. "Your studies weren't enough to save us." "No," he acknowledged, the familiar weight of that failure settling in his chest. "The alignment moved faster than we anticipated. By the time we understood what was happening, it was too late." Nyara considered this as she took a small portion of food, eating with deliberate care. "Yet you recognized me." "I recognized your breath patterns. The cadence is distinctive." She paused, studying him with renewed intensity. "Most would have walked past." Thorne met her gaze directly. "I've walked past too many things in my life." A moment of understanding passed between them. Not comfort, not yet trust, but recognition. They were both survivors of different calamities, both carrying memories others had tried to erase. "How do you know our breath forms?" she asked after finishing her small portion of food. Thorne hesitated, then moved to retrieve his journal. An actual bound book with paper pages, a luxury few could afford in a digital age. He opened it to reveal pages of handwritten notes, breath pattern diagrams, and linguistic annotations. "I spent 2 years on Tarsa, working with a Xanthian elder named Coral." He traced a pattern on the page. "He taught me the basic ceremonial forms, though I never achieved fluency." Nyara's expression changed at the name, a subtle widening of her eyes. "Coral was my mother's uncle." The connection stunned him. "That's improbable," she finished. "Yet here we are." Thorne nodded, processing this extraordinary coincidence. "The universe has strange currents." "Not coincidence," she said, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality. "The breath finds its path." She reached toward the journal but stopped short of touching it. "May I?" "Of course." He passed it to her. Nyara's fingers moved across the pages with reverence, tracing the patterns he'd documented years ago. Occasionally, her lips would move in silent correction, or her breathing would shift to demonstrate a proper form. Thorne watched, transfixed by her grace in the knowledge she embodied. "These are primary patterns," she said eventually. "Foundation breath, children's learning." Thorne couldn't help but smile ruefully. "Corell always said I breathed like an infant." To his surprise, Nyara's lips curved slightly, the ghost of a smile. He was being generous. That unexpected moment of humor transformed something between them, not erasing the trauma or bridging the gap of their different worlds, but creating a small opening where connection might begin to grow. As if sensing this shift herself, Nyara closed the journal and returned it to him, their fingers brushing momentarily. The contact was brief but electric, her skin cooler than human standard, with a subtle texture like fine silk. "Why did you help me?" she asked directly, her silver-ringed eyes holding his. Thorne considered several answers, discarding each as insufficient. Finally, he settled on the truth. "Because what your people carried was precious. Because knowledge deserves to live. Because I was there, and I could." She studied him, silent for a long moment. "Not because I might be valuable?" "You are valuable," he corrected, but not as property, as a carrier of memory. Nyara nodded slowly, accepting his answer. Then we have aligned purposes for now. That evening, as station lights dimmed to simulate night, Thorn watched Nyara perform what appeared to be a ritual breathing exercise. She knelt in the center of the room, eyes closed, hands resting palm up on her knees. Her breath moved through complex patterns, sometimes deep and resonant, sometimes quick and light, always precise. It was like watching someone speak a physical language, communicating something profound through the simple act of respiration. "What are you doing?" he asked when she finished, curiosity overcoming his reluctance to interrupt. She opened her eyes, focusing on him with that penetrating gaze. "Remembering." "Remembering what?" "Everything." She shifted to face him more directly. "Each breath pattern contains knowledge, histories, sciences, philosophies, ceremonies. We don't record, we embody. When I breathe these patterns, I keep them alive." Thorn leaned forward, fascinated. "You can store information in breath patterns?" "Not store," she corrected. "Embody. The patterns work with our neurology, creating memory associations. The breath is the carrier, not the container." "Like a mnemonic device," he suggested. Nyara considered this. "Similar but more fundamental. Your mnemonics are tools you use. Our breath patterns are what we are." Thorn's mind raced with the implications. No wonder the alignment had targeted the Xanthians, a species whose entire knowledge base couldn't be extracted, copied, or controlled, represented a fundamental challenge to their information hegemony. "Will you show me?" he asked impulsively. Nyara tilted her head, studying him. "Show you what?" "A simple pattern. Something I might learn." She hesitated, and he immediately regretted the request. "I'm sorry. That was presumptuous." "No," she said, surprising him. "It was unexpected." She seemed to reach a decision. "Come, sit closer." Thorn moved to sit across from her, mirroring her cross-legged position. Their knees nearly touched in the small space. "This is Navari, greeting breath," she explained. "Watch first." She inhaled slowly through her nose, held for 3 beats, then released the breath in a pattern. Quick, slow, quick, long. She repeated it 3 times, the air between them seeming to vibrate with meaning. "Now you," she instructed. Thorn attempted to copy the pattern, but his first try was clearly incorrect. Nyara's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "Your diaphragm is too tight," she observed. "May I?" When he nodded, she surprised him by reaching forward and placing her hand gently on his abdomen, just below his ribcage. Her touch was cool and light, but it sent unexpected warmth spreading through him. "Breathe from here," she instructed, applying the slightest pressure. "Let the air fill completely before shaping it." Under her guidance, Thorn tried again. This time the pattern emerged more clearly. Not perfect, but recognizable. Nyara nodded, satisfaction visible in her eyes. "Better." She withdrew her hand, but the sensation of her touch lingered. "With practice, you might advance beyond infant level." There it was again, that subtle humor. Thorn found himself smiling in response. "I've always been a quick study," he said. "We'll see." But there was no dismissal in her tone, only a curious assessment. As she moved to return to her side of the room, the station's lighting suddenly flickered, then dimmed completely for several seconds before emergency systems engaged. The familiar hum of environmental systems faltered, then returned at a higher pitch. Thorn was on his feet instantly, moving to the small terminal embedded in the wall. The display showed cascading alert symbols. "What's happening?" Nyara asked, standing beside him with unexpected swiftness. "Security sweep," he explained grimly, scanning the alerts. "They're running power diagnostics sector by sector, looking for unauthorized usage patterns." He turned to her. "Someone's searching methodically." "For me?" The question was asked without fear, only practical assessment. "For us," he corrected. "My heritage protection claim would have triggered flags in certain systems." Thorn moved quickly to a storage compartment, retrieving a small pack that held emergency supplies, his most important data crystals, and basic survival tools. "We need to move," he said, checking the terminal again. "They've started with the lower quadrants, but they'll reach this sector within an hour." Nyara nodded, already gathering the few items she'd been given. Her efficiency spoke of previous experience with sudden departures. "Where will we go?" she asked. Thorne considered their options. Celestia Station was vast, with hundreds of kilometers of corridors, chambers, and maintenance tunnels spanning its 5 interconnected rings. But security systems covered most public areas, and his credentials wouldn't withstand serious scrutiny. The agricultural ring, he decided. It's primarily automated, minimal surveillance, and the environmental systems are self-contained to protect the crops if other station areas are compromised. "You've planned for this," she observed. "I've survived this long by having exit strategies." He paused, looking at her directly. "This won't be comfortable or safe. If you prefer to take your chances elsewhere—" "No," she interrupted with unexpected firmness. "Our paths are joined now." Something in her certainty steadied him. He nodded and moved to the wall panel beside his sleeping platform, pressing a sequence that caused a section of the floor to slide away, revealing a maintenance shaft. "This connects to the secondary cooling system," he explained. "We can follow it to the transport junction, then access the service corridors to Ag Ring." Nyara approached, peering into the narrow shaft with apprehension, but no hesitation. "You first, or shall I lead?" "I'll go first," Thorne said, impressed by her composure. "The path has some tricky turns." He lowered himself into the shaft, then looked up at her. In the emergency lighting, her azure skin gleamed with an almost ethereal quality, her eyes capturing what little light remained in the room. For a moment their gazes held, something unspoken passing between them. Not quite trust, but perhaps its beginning. "Ready?" he asked softly. "Yes," she answered, and followed him into the darkness. The maintenance shaft narrowed as they descended, forcing them to crawl in some sections. The air grew thicker with the scent of lubricants and ozone. Thorne moved with practiced efficiency, counting junctions and checking orientation markers embedded in the tunnel walls. Behind him, Nyara followed with remarkable agility, her breathing controlled despite the confined space. They reached a junction where several shafts converged into a larger maintenance hub. Thorne paused, listening carefully. The distant hum of station systems provided constant background noise, but he was attuned to patterns, a skill that had kept him alive. Something felt wrong. "Wait," he whispered, holding up a hand. Nyara froze instantly, her breathing shifting to near silence. Thorne admired her instinctive response to danger. Then he heard it, the faint metallic click of a maintenance drone. Not the regular service units that followed predictable patterns, but the heavier sound of a security model. They were being hunted. "Change of plans," he said, his voice barely audible. "We need to go deeper." Without questioning, Nyara nodded, following as he turned down a narrower shaft that angled sharply downward. This wasn't on his planned route. It would take them into the true underbelly of the station, areas that didn't appear on official schematics. The shaft eventually opened into a forgotten storage chamber. Ancient crates bearing faded corporate logos stood in dusty rows. The air was stale but breathable, with the lingering scent of preserved components and abandoned ambitions. "What is this place?" Nyara asked, gazing around as Thorne secured the access panel behind them. "Supply depot from the original station construction," he explained. "Most people don't know these lower chambers exist. They were sealed off when the station was expanded 70 years ago." He moved to a control panel that hadn't been active in decades, connecting a bypass module from his pack. After several attempts, dim emergency lighting flickered to life, revealing the true scale of the chamber, easily 100 meters across, filled with forgotten cargo. "We should be safe here temporarily," Thorne said, checking his datalet. "Security sweeps don't extend to these areas. They're considered structurally compromised in the official records." "But they're not," Nyara observed, running her hand along a support column. "No, the original engineers built better than anyone knew." He smiled faintly. "Bureaucratic inefficiency sometimes works in our favor." He retrieved 2 hydration packets from his pack, offering one to Nyara. She accepted with a nod of thanks, studying him as she drank. "You navigated here without hesitation," she noted. "How many escape routes do you maintain?" "Enough." Thorne settled against a crate, fatigue suddenly catching up with him. "Living outside official channels requires preparation." "What did you do?" she asked quietly. "To require such preparation?" Thorne met her gaze. Her question deserved honesty. I refused to participate in knowledge destruction. When the Linguistic Purification Directive was implemented, I was ordered to delete the archives I'd spent my career building. Records of over 2,000 languages, many already extinct except in our databases. And you refused. I did worse than refuse. I copied everything, fragmented the data, and distributed it through underground preservation networks. His mouth twisted. Unfortunately, I wasn't as careful as I thought. They traced one of the distribution points back to me. So you fled. With what I could carry, he tapped his temple, and what I could remember. Nyara moved closer, settling beside him with unexpected grace. That's why you recognize my breathing patterns. You were preserving what you thought was lost. Yes. The simple acknowledgement hung between them. Our purposes align more than I realized, she said after a moment. Their shoulders were nearly touching now, and Thorn became acutely aware of her presence. The subtle scent of her skin, like distant rain, the gentle sound of her breathing, the cool aura that seemed to emanate from her azure form. How did you survive? He asked, the question he'd held back earlier. The reports said the Harmony protocols were thorough. Pain flickered across her features, but she didn't withdraw. They were, but they understood us poorly. They believed our knowledge died with our bodies. But it doesn't. Not if it's passed on. Her voice softened. My mother hid me during the initial purge. Later, we were separated during transport to a processing facility. I was young. They thought I hadn't completed the knowledge transference rituals. Had you? Some, not all. Her eyes grew distant. I've spent my life remembering what I learned and mourning what died with her. Without thinking, Thorn reached out, covering her hand with his own. Her skin was cool but not cold, like touching water from a spring. She looked at their joined hands with surprise but didn't pull away. I'm sorry, he said simply. As am I, she responded, then turned her hand to clasp his briefly. But sorrow doesn't help us survive. Action does. The matter-of-fact courage in her voice stirred something in him. Admiration, certainly, but also a warmth he'd nearly forgotten how to feel. Rest, he suggested. I'll take first watch. To his surprise, Nyara shook her head. Your body needs recovery more than mine. My species requires less sleep. She settled more comfortably against the crate. I'll wake you if anything changes. Thorn wanted to protest but recognized the logic in her words. His eyes were already growing heavy. 2 hours, he conceded. Then we switch. Agreed. Her voice held a gentle authority that somehow made it easy to yield. As he closed his eyes, the last thing he saw was Nyara's face in the dim light, her expression watchful but serene. For the first time in years, Thorn felt the strange comfort of not being alone. He dreamed of breath patterns dancing in the dark. Thorn woke to the sensation of something cool touching his forehead. Opening his eyes, he found Nyara kneeling beside him, her fingers gently pressed to his brow. She withdrew immediately when she saw he was awake. Your temperature elevated while you slept, she explained. I was checking for illness. Just dreams, he said, sitting up. The chamber remained quiet, emergency lighting casting long shadows across the forgotten cargo. How long was I out? 4 hours, 17 minutes. He frowned. You were supposed to wake me after 2. You needed the rest, she stated simply. I'm fine. Thorn knew he should be annoyed at her disregard for their agreement, but found himself touched instead. It had been a long time since anyone had shown concern for his well-being. Thank you, he said, stretching to work out the stiffness in his muscles. Any activity? Occasional mechanical sounds from the upper levels. Nothing close. She gestured to the far wall. I explored while you slept. There's another exit on the eastern side, an old maintenance elevator shaft. It appears to connect to the agricultural sectors. Thorn raised his eyebrows, impressed. You've been busy. Survival requires awareness, she said pragmatically, but he caught a hint of pride in her voice. He checked his datalet, scanning for security alerts. The normal protocols were still active, but no focused sweep patterns appeared near their location. We should move soon, he decided. Best to reach Ag Ring during shift change when movement is less noticeable. Nyara nodded, then hesitated. Before we go, she reached into the folds of her tunic and withdrew something wrapped in a scrap of fabric. Carefully unfolding it, she revealed a small crystal, no larger than her thumb, with spiraling patterns etched into its surface. In the dim light, it seemed to pulse with its own inner luminescence. Thorne stared, recognition dawning. "Is that—" "A breath crystal," she confirmed. "One of the last. It contains the first patterns, the foundation codes of our ancestral memory." The significance of what she was showing him wasn't lost on Thorne. This was more than a cultural artifact. It was the heart of her people's inheritance. "I thought all the crystals were destroyed during the purge," he said softly. "Most were. This one was hidden by my mother inside my body." She touched her side, just below her ribs. "A small surgical pocket, sealed until I reached maturity." Thorne understood now why she was considered so valuable. The collector who had you, he knew about this? He suspected. He performed scans but couldn't detect it. "Our crystals are biologically reactive. They only respond to Xanthian physiology." Her expression darkened. "He planned more invasive examinations before you intervened." The thought of what she'd nearly endured made Thorne's jaw tighten. "Why are you showing me this now?" Nyara met his gaze directly. "Because if something happens to me, someone must know it exists. Someone must ensure it isn't lost." She extended her hand, offering the crystal. "I entrust this knowledge to you." The gesture stunned him. "Nyara, Not permanently," she clarified. "But if we're separated, if I'm captured, you must keep it safe until you find another of my kind." The weight of her trust settled over him. Thorne carefully took the crystal, feeling a subtle vibration against his skin. Not unpleasant, but alien, like holding a piece of solidified energy. "I'll protect it," he promised, his voice low with conviction. "And you, if I can." She nodded, satisfaction in her eyes. "Then we're truly aligned." As he carefully wrapped the crystal and secured it in an inner pocket, Thorne realized how profoundly their relationship had shifted in just these few hours. From rescuer and rescued to something more balanced, partners in a shared purpose. "The elevator shaft you found," he said, gathering their meager supplies. "Let's check it out." They navigated through the shadowy chamber, around stacked crates and forgotten machinery. The elevator shaft Nyara had discovered was sealed with a maintenance panel. Thorne examined it carefully before applying his bypass module. Ancient mechanisms groaned to life, the panel sliding reluctantly aside to reveal a narrow vertical tunnel with ladder rungs embedded in the wall. "This should connect to the tertiary maintenance level of Agring," he said, shining a light upward. "About 8 levels up." "I'll go first," Nyara offered. Before he could object, she had already grasped the rungs and begun climbing with surprising agility. Thorne followed, trying not to notice how the emergency lighting caught the graceful movement of her form above him. The shaft was narrow but structurally sound, a testament to the original engineer's work. As they climbed, the air gradually changed, becoming fresher, carrying hints of vegetation and moisture. When they reached a junction point, Nyara paused, waiting for his guidance. Thorne checked his mental map of the station's layout. "Left here," he directed. "There should be an access panel that opens near the hydroponics section." They continued through increasingly narrow passages until they reached the panel Thorne had predicted. He pressed his ear against it, listening carefully for any activity on the other side. Hearing nothing concerning, he applied gentle pressure to the release mechanism. The panel opened onto a small maintenance corridor bathed in the artificial daylight used for the agricultural sections. Plants lined the walls in vertical growing channels, some sort of leafy vegetable that created a natural screen for their emergence point. "Perfect," Thorne whispered. "We can blend with the maintenance workers here." They slipped into the corridor, securing the panel behind them. Agring was a marvel of engineering, a complete ecosystem designed to provide fresh food for the station's population. Enormous growing chambers stretched in every direction, filled with carefully tended crops. The air was rich with oxygen and the earthy scent of growth. "It's beautiful," Nyara said softly, her eyes wide as she took in the greenery surrounding them. "I've only seen plants in collection facilities before." Something in her wonder made Thorne see the familiar environment with new appreciation. "The agricultural sectors are the heart of any station," he explained as they walked carefully between rows of plants. "These systems are designed to be self-sustaining. They have their own water reclamation, specialized atmospheric processors, even separate power grids." "A perfect hiding place," she observed. For a while at least. They moved deeper into the agricultural complex, avoiding the main work areas where technicians monitored growing conditions. Thorne led them toward the northwestern quadrant, where density scanners were less frequent and the more experimental crops created areas of denser vegetation. There's a research station that's only used during day shifts, he explained in a low voice. It has basic facilities, water, power, even sleeping quarters for researchers pulling long observation cycles. You've used it before, Nyara guessed. Once or twice. Thorne offered a small smile. I find it's useful to have sanctuaries throughout the station. As they approached the research module, a prefabricated structure nestled among tall stalks of what appeared to be modified wheat, Thorne suddenly raised his hand, signaling Nyara to stop. She froze instantly. What? She began, but he shook his head sharply. Thorne pointed to a nearly invisible thread crossing the path ahead. A tripwire connected to a small monitoring device partially hidden in the foliage. It hadn't been there during his last visit. Someone had set a trap. Nyara's gaze followed his pointing finger, quickly identifying the threat. Without speaking, she moved closer to him, her body nearly pressed against his side as she leaned in to whisper directly into his ear. Not random security, she breathed, her cool breath sending an unexpected shiver down his neck. Targeted. Thorne nodded, his mind racing through possibilities. The trap was sophisticated but minimalist, designed to alert rather than capture. That suggested a smaller operation, not station security. Bounty hunters, he whispered back, or private collectors, someone who wants to avoid official channels. Nyara's expression hardened. The market dealer? Possibly. Thorne surveyed their surroundings. We need to change direction. They backed away carefully, then circled through a dense section of climbing vines. Thorne led them deeper into the agricultural complex, away from the main corridors and toward the environmental control systems. Where are we going? Nyara asked when they'd put sufficient distance between themselves and the trap. The atmospheric regulation chamber, Thorne replied. It's heavily shielded to protect the air processing equipment, should block most scanning methods. They navigated through increasingly technical areas, where plants gave way to machinery. Few workers ventured here. The systems were largely automated, with maintenance scheduled during specific cycles. Thorne checked his datalet as they approached a heavy door marked with atmospheric hazard symbols. We're in luck, he said. No scheduled maintenance for another 36 hours. He overrode the security lock, a basic model designed more to prevent accidents than intruders, and they slipped inside. The chamber was spacious but utilitarian, filled with humming air processors and filtration systems. A small control station occupied one corner, with monitoring displays and a basic workstation. It's safe to talk normally here, Thorne said, securing the door behind them. The equipment noise masks conversation, and the shielding blocks most surveillance. He accessed the control terminal, checking station security alerts. What he found made his stomach tighten. They've issued a full retrieval order, he said grimly. Not just for you, for both of us. Nyara approached, looking over his shoulder at the display. What does that mean? It means someone with significant authority wants us found. Thorne scrolled through the alert details. The official reason is unauthorized removal of research property and violation of heritage protection protocols. They're claiming my preservation claim was fraudulent. Can they do that? They shouldn't be able to, but Thorne trailed off as he noticed the authorization code. This came from the Sovereign Alignment Research Division. Nyara went very still. The same division that implemented the Harmony protocols. Yes, Thorne turned to face her. This isn't about station rules or market territory. This is about what you are, what you know. Her hand moved unconsciously to the place where the crystal had been hidden within her. They know about the first patterns. They must suspect at least. Thorne ran a hand through his hair, thinking rapidly. We need to get off this station. How? The question was practical, not fearful. All departures are monitored. Thorne considered their options. Commercial transports required identification verification. Cargo vessels had advanced scanning systems to prevent exactly the kind of stowaway attempt they would need to make. Then a memory surfaced, a conversation overheard in one of the lower markets 3 days earlier. The botanical transfer, he said, the plan forming as he spoke. Every 6 months, Celestia exchanges experimental plant specimens with the Perimeter Botanical Research Facility. The transfer shuttle uses specialized containment systems that interfere with standard bioscans. When is the next transfer? Thorne checked the station schedule on his datalet. Tomorrow. Aero 600 station time. Nyara considered this information. Where is this perimeter facility? It's an independent research station in the Outer Rim territories, technically neutral space. If we can reach it, we'd be beyond alignment jurisdiction. Hope flickered in her silver-ringed eyes. How do we access the shuttle? That's the complicated part. Thorne activated a schematic of the agricultural shipping area. The specimens are prepared and sealed in environmental containment units today, then loaded for early departure tomorrow. If we can get into the preparation area, we might be able to hide among the shipment. The containers are monitored? For atmospheric conditions, yes. For unauthorized passengers, Thorne smiled slightly. Let's just say the priority is protecting the plants, not scanning for stowaways. Nyara's lips curved in response, the most genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, bringing a luminescence to her features that caught him off guard. A plan with hope, she said softly. I haven't had one of those in a very long time. Something in her expression made Thorne's chest tighten. Without thinking, he reached out, his fingers brushing her arm in a gesture of reassurance. Her skin was cool but not cold, with a subtle texture unlike human flesh. Smoother, almost silken. We'll make it work, he promised. She didn't pull away from his touch. Instead, she placed her hand over his, a gesture of unexpected intimacy. I believe you, she said simply. The moment stretched between them, a fragile connection neither seemed willing to break. Thorne became acutely aware of her proximity, the subtle scent of her skin, the rhythm of her breathing, the way her violet hair caught the light from the monitoring stations. A sudden alert from his datalet shattered the moment. Thorne reluctantly withdrew his hand to check the notification. They've expanded the search parameters, he reported, scanning the update. Full biometric scanning at all major junctions. Nyara straightened, the brief vulnerability gone from her expression. Then we should prepare. What do we need for this botanical transfer? Thorne found himself studying her features, noticing details he'd missed before. The slight upward tilt at the corners of her eyes, the delicate ridge that ran along her cheekbones, the way her violet hair seemed to move as if touched by an unseen current. You're staring, she noted, but without censure. I'm sorry, he said, looking away. It's the xenolinguist in me. I was trained to observe. Is that the only reason? The question held a hint of something Thorne couldn't quite identify. Curiosity, perhaps, or challenge. He met her gaze again, finding unexpected warmth there. No, he admitted, not the only reason. The atmosphere between them shifted subtly, an unspoken acknowledgement of something neither was ready to name. Nyara moved closer, seated beside him at the small monitoring station, their shoulders nearly touching. In my culture, she said softly, observation is intimate. To truly see another is the beginning of understanding. And understanding is the beginning of what? Thorne asked, his voice equally quiet. She turned to face him, close enough that he could feel the cool radiation of her skin. Of connection. The word hung between them, laden with meaning beyond its simple syllables. Thorne was acutely aware of her proximity, of the gentle rhythm of her breath, of the subtle current that seemed to flow between them, as tangible as touch. Without conscious decision, he raised his hand, fingers hovering near her cheek in silent question. Nyara didn't withdraw. Instead, she leaned slightly into his touch as his fingertips finally made contact with her skin. The sensation was electric, not merely the physical coolness of her alien physiology, but something deeper, a resonance that seemed to vibrate between them. Her eyes, those remarkable midnight pools ringed with silver, held his with an intensity that made words unnecessary. Thorne didn't know which of them moved first. Perhaps they both did, drawn by the same invisible gravity. His lips met hers, cool at first contact, then warming with shared breath. The kiss was gentle, exploratory, a crossing of boundaries both physical and metaphorical. When they finally separated, Thorne remained close, forehead nearly touching hers. I didn't plan for this, he whispered. Some patterns can't be planned, she replied, her voice carrying that musical quality he'd come to cherish. They emerged from the breath between moments. Her words, so characteristic of her people's philosophy, yet so perfectly applicable to this unexpected development between them, made him smile. Is that Xanthian wisdom? No, she said, her lips curving upward. That's just me. The simple statement, the first truly personal declaration she'd made, touched something deep in Thorne. This wasn't just about preservation or protection anymore. It was about two beings finding unexpected connection amid chaos. The hours that followed were spent in careful preparation. They took turns resting while the other kept watch, gathering what supplies they could from the atmospheric regulation chamber, water purification tablets, emergency oxygen injectors, and basic tools that wouldn't be missed. As artificial night fell across the agricultural ring, indicated by the gradual dimming of the specialized growing lights, Thorne finalized their approach to the specimen preparation area. The shift change happens at 2200 hour, he explained, showing Niara the staff rotation schedule he'd accessed. There's a 15-minute window when the lab is minimally staffed. Niara nodded, absorbing the information with the focused attention he'd come to appreciate. In the dimmed lighting, her azure skin seemed to hold a subtle phosphorescence, and her eyes, those remarkable midnight blue orbs ringed with silver, appeared to gather what little light remained in the chamber. You're bioluminescent, Thorne observed, the scientist in him momentarily overriding their urgent circumstances. Niara glanced down at her arms, where a faint pattern of light traced beneath her skin like a network of stars. Yes, though it's usually only noticeable in near darkness, it's an evolutionary adaptation from our ancestral oceanic phase. It's beautiful, Thorne said before he could stop himself. She looked up, surprise flashing across her features. For a moment she seemed unsure how to respond to the compliment. Then softly, thank you. They moved through the agricultural ring like shadows among the greenery, taking advantage of the early shift change as workers transitioned from night to morning duties. Thorne led the way, his knowledge of station routines guiding them through service corridors and maintenance access points toward the specimen preparation laboratory. Niara followed close behind, her movements fluid and silent. She wore a technician's coverall Thorne had procured from a storage locker, the fabric several sizes too large but sufficient to conceal her azure skin from casual observation. Her violet hair was tucked beneath a cap, and she kept her head angled downward, avoiding direct eye contact with any passing workers. Almost there, Thorne murmured as they approached the final junction before the laboratory complex. Remember the plan, quick and quiet. We identify the perimeter-bound containers, wait for the techs to finish the preparation, then make our move during final inspection. They paused at a viewing port that offered a clear line of sight into the preparation area. Inside, 3 technicians moved between rows of cylindrical containment units, each approximately 2 meters tall and 1 meter in diameter. The units were transparent, revealing various plant specimens suspended in specialized nutrient mediums. There, Thorne whispered, pointing to a clipboard hanging near the entrance. The manifest should tell us which units are going to perimeter. They waited as the techs completed their morning checks and departed for the adjacent monitoring room, leaving the preparation area momentarily unattended. Thorne moved swiftly, swiping his access card, reprogrammed to mimic maintenance credentials, and guiding Niara inside. The preparation lab smelled of nutrient solutions and plant matter, a rich organic scent that contrasted with the sterile environments of most station areas. Thorne went directly to the manifest while Niara examined the containment units. Units 7 through 12, he reported after scanning the document, scheduled for transport to perimeter station. Niara moved to the designated containers, studying their construction. These are designed for plants, not people, she observed. How do we... Her question was cut short by the sound of the door mechanism activating. Without a word, Thorne pulled her behind a large equipment rack, just as 2 figures entered the lab. I'm telling you, the alert came directly from Alignment Central, a man's voice said. Full biometric scanning of all botanical transfers. Because of 2 fugitives? A woman responded skeptically. Seems excessive. Apparently one of them is carrying restricted biological material, something to do with the Harmony protocols, way above our clearance level. Thorne felt Niara tense beside him. Her hand found his in the shadows, fingers interlacing with his own, in a gesture that conveyed both fear and determination. "Well, let's get it over with," the woman sighed. "Start with the perimeter shipment. It leaves in 3 hours." The timing couldn't have been worse. Thorne's mind raced through alternatives, but their options were rapidly diminishing. The containment units were now under direct scrutiny, eliminating their planned hiding place. As the technicians approached the units, Thorne made a split-second decision. He squeezed Nayara's hand once, then released it, pulling a small device from his pocket, an atmospheric sampler he'd modified into a rudimentary smoke generator. "Cover your face," he whispered, then activated the device and rolled it beneath the nearest workstation. Within seconds, thick white vapor began pouring from the device, triggering the lab's atmospheric contamination alarms. The technicians reacted immediately, shouting in surprise as emergency protocols activated, sealing the main entrance but opening the emergency evacuation routes. "Containment breach," the male technician yelled. "Outside decon procedures." Thorne pulled Nayara toward the emergency exit as chaos erupted around them. They joined the small stream of personnel evacuating through the decontamination corridor, keeping their heads down and moving with purposeful urgency. Once through the emergency protocols and into the adjacent section, Thorne guided them away from the gathering crowd, down a maintenance corridor that led toward the shipping bay. "That wasn't the plan," Nayara observed when they were safely distant from the commotion. "Plans adapt," Thorne replied, checking his datalet for station alerts. "We've lost our containment unit option, but gained something else, a station-wide atmospheric contamination procedure." Understanding dawned in Nayara's eyes. "They'll be focused on containment protocols." "Exactly. And during Level 3 contamination alerts, all non-essential systems divert power to environmental safety." He showed her the security grid display on his datalet, where large sections had gone dark, including most of the biometric scanning network. "So we go directly to the shuttle," she concluded. "It's riskier, but yes." Thorne studied the station schematic. "The botanical transfer will still proceed once the lab is cleared. These shipments are priority. We need to reach the loading dock before the specimens do." They navigated through increasingly industrial areas of the agricultural ring, where the lush vegetation gave way to processing equipment and transport systems. The loading dock was a cavernous space with multiple shuttle bays, each designated for specific cargo types. Thorne led them to an observation gallery overlooking Bay 4, where the small botanical transfer shuttle was undergoing pre-flight checks. The vessel was streamlined and specialized, designed specifically for transporting sensitive biological materials between research facilities. "There's our ride," he said, studying the security arrangements below. The contamination alert had reduced the usual complement of dock workers, but several security officers remained at their posts. "How do we get aboard?" Nayara asked, her voice calm despite the tension evident in her posture. Thorne pointed to a maintenance access point near the shuttle's docking collar. "That service tunnel connects directly to the environmental systems. During pre-flight, they run atmosphere exchange protocols to ensure proper conditions for the botanical specimens. So we enter through the life support systems? It's tight, but possible." Thorne checked the shuttle's preparation timeline on a nearby status display. "We have 20 minutes before they begin loading the specimens." They descended to the lower level, timing their movements to coincide with shift rotations and equipment transfers. The maintenance access point was secured with a basic lock, designed more to prevent accidents than intruders, which Thorne bypassed with practiced ease. The service tunnel was narrow, barely large enough for them to crawl through in single file. Thorne went first, navigating by memory in the faint emergency lighting embedded in the tunnel floor. Behind him, Nayara moved with remarkable agility despite the confined space. "Almost there," he whispered as they approached a junction where the tunnel widened slightly. "The access panel to the shuttle's environmental systems should be just ahead." They reached the panel, which was vibrating gently with the hum of active systems. Thorne carefully removed the securing bolts, setting them aside to avoid any noise. As the panel came free, cool air rushed past them, the specialized atmosphere being cycled through the shuttle in preparation for the botanical specimens. "Now," Thorne said, sliding through the opening into the shuttle's environmental control chamber. He reached back to help Nayara, their hands clasping as she followed him into the small, equipment-filled space. The chamber was cramped but unoccupied, filled with air processors and atmospheric regulation systems. Multiple ducts led to different sections of the shuttle, circulating the precisely calibrated atmosphere throughout the vessel. "Where now?" Nyara asked, her voice barely audible over the machinery. Thorne oriented himself, recalling the standard layout of these specialized shuttles. "The cargo hold will be monitored until departure. We need somewhere isolated but safe." He examined the various ducts, tracing their paths mentally. "Here," he decided, pointing to a larger maintenance shaft. "This should connect to the secondary storage area, used for equipment, not specimens. It won't be checked as thoroughly." They moved carefully into the shaft, which ascended at a steep angle before opening into a dimly lit compartment. As Thorne had predicted, it contained storage racks filled with maintenance equipment and backup environmental systems. "We can secure ourselves here," he said, examining the space. "Once we're in transit, we can assess whether it's safe to move elsewhere in the shuttle." Nyara surveyed their hiding place with a practiced eye. "How long is the journey to Perimeter Station?" "Approximately 16 hours. Thorne began clearing a space behind a large equipment rack, creating a concealed area where they could wait. "The shuttle is automated. No crew, just systems monitoring the specimen conditions." They settled into their hiding places. Voices and movement became audible from the main cargo hold. The botanical specimens were being loaded, each containment unit carefully secured in specialized cradles. Nyara positioned herself beside Thorne in the narrow space, their bodies necessarily close. Despite the tension of their situation, Thorne found himself acutely aware of her proximity. The cool presence of her alien form, the subtle pattern of her breathing, the faint luminescence of her skin in the dim lighting. "What happens when we reach Perimeter Station?" she asked quietly as the loading procedures continued beyond their hiding place. "It's an independent research facility, not technically aligned with any major political entity. They have their own security, but they're primarily scientists, not soldiers." Thorne adjusted his position, his shoulder pressing against hers. "From there, we can arrange transport to the outer territories." "Where the surviving Xanthians might be," Nyara added, a note of hope in her voice that hadn't been there before. "Yes." Thorne turned slightly to face her in the confined space. "Nyara, if we make it through this—" "When," she corrected with unexpected firmness, "when we make it through this." The conviction in her voice stirred something in him. Admiration, certainly, but also a deepening of the connection that had been growing between them. "When we make it through this," he amended, "what happens next? Between us, I mean." In the dim light, her silver-ringed eyes studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond surface meanings. "Does there need to be a fixed pattern?" she asked. "Can we not simply breathe together and let our shared path reveal itself?" The Xanthian philosophy in her words struck Thorne as profoundly wise. "Is that how your people approach relationships?" "My people had many formal rituals," she said, a hint of sadness coloring her voice. "But the essence of connection was always the shared breath between two beings, finding harmony in the spaces where our patterns met." As if to demonstrate, she shifted closer, her breath mingling with his in the small space between them. The simple act felt deeply intimate, a sharing more profound than mere physical contact. "I would like to learn your breath," she said softly, the words carrying cultural significance he was only beginning to understand. Without hesitation, Thorne responded, "And I would learn yours." The shuttle's engines engaged with a low vibration that resonated through the structure around them. They were moving, breaking free from Celestia Station and the pursuit that had driven them together. As the vessel accelerated toward open space, Nyara's hand found his in the darkness, cool fingers interlacing with his own. No words were needed. Their breath and touch communicated all that mattered in this moment of transition. Together they had escaped. Together they would face whatever awaited them among the stars. And in the quiet spaces between breaths, something profound was growing, a connection that transcended species and circumstance, built on shared purpose and unexpected understanding. Thorne tightened his grip on her hand as the shuttle carried them toward an uncertain future, one they would navigate not as rescuer and rescued, but as equal partners in a journey neither had anticipated, but both now embraced.